Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
On the way to the airport, the woman remembered that her passport was left at home. She had to turn back, but from the doorway, she accidentally overheard a strange conversation between her husband and mother-in-law. It was impossible to believe. Hello, dear listeners. I'm starting a new story for you. And meanwhile, write in the comments what city you're from. Let's see how far our stories travel. Esmeralda had always been proud of her organizational skills. Back in university, her classmates were amazed at how she managed to combine studies, part-time work, and her personal life. "You must have a built-in calendar," her friends used to joke. That's why when she woke up at 6:30 to the annoying sound of her alarm, everything was already prepared for the trip. Monday promised to be busy: a business trip to a European capital, negotiations with coffee equipment suppliers, and a chance to expand her cafe network. Esmeralda stretched in bed, feeling a pleasant ache in her muscles after yesterday's gym workout. Maximiliano was already up. She could smell the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and hear the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Esmeralda smiled. Her husband always got up earlier to make her breakfast before important meetings. Even after 2 years of marriage, his care still warmed her heart. She quickly showered, put on a strict gray suit, and went to the kitchen. Maximiliano was at the stove flipping eggs. His dark hair was tousled, his face lit with a gentle morning smile. "Good morning, my business shark," he said tenderly, without turning. "Thank you, dear," Esmeralda replied gratefully. She hugged her husband from behind, burying her nose in his warm neck. "You're the best." Maximiliano turned in her arms, kissed her forehead. "How long will you be gone?" he asked with concern. 3 days. I'll be back Thursday evening. Can you survive without me?" Esmeralda teased with a wink. "I'll try to manage," Maximiliano laughed. "Just make sure to bring me something tasty. And yourself, safe and sound." They had breakfast together, discussing Esmeralda's travel plans. Maximiliano listened attentively, asked questions about the new suppliers, showed interest in the details. Esmeralda appreciated his involvement in her business. Not every husband supported a wife entrepreneur this way. He knew her nature well, knew how even the smallest disruption of plans upset her. That's why his support mattered so much. He really understood her. By 8:30, Esmeralda was already in a taxi heading to the airport. Her suitcase had been packed the night before. Her documents were in her handbag, the presentation loaded on her tablet. Everything was going according to plan. Outside, gray apartment blocks slid by. A few pedestrians hurried to work. Just an ordinary Monday morning in a big city. The driver was silent, only occasionally muttering complaints at other drivers. Esmeralda scrolled through her phone. A vacation photo from her friend Soledad, a report from one of her cafe managers about the weekend revenue, a message from her mother wishing her a safe trip. The airport was crowded. Esmeralda quickly made her way to the check-in desk. She showed her ticket, then reached into her handbag for her passport. Her hand touched her wallet, then her phone. Keys, notebook, but no passport. She opened the bag wider and impatiently peered inside. The document wasn't there. She frantically searched every pocket, emptied the contents onto the counter. The girl at the desk gave her a sympathetic look. "Left it at home?" she asked gently. "Looks like it," Esmeralda admitted, flustered. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Can I postpone check-in?" "Of course. You have an hour and a half before departure." The forgotten passport wasn't just an inconvenience for Esmeralda. It was a blow to her self-esteem. She never forgot important things. She never ruined plans through her own carelessness. She quickly stuffed her things back into her bag and called a taxi. Options raced through her mind. Ask Maximiliano to bring the passport, go get it herself and return, reschedule the flight. The second seemed fastest. The ride home took 20 minutes. Esmeralda drummed her fingers nervously on the seat and calculated the time. If traffic wasn't bad, she could still make it. The negotiations were too important to lose because of her absent-mindedness. The taxi stopped at the entrance to their apartment complex. Esmeralda quickly paid and almost ran toward the building. The elevator, luckily, was waiting on the first floor. While riding up to the 7th, she remembered exactly where she had last seen her passport. On the hallway table, next to the keys. Yes, right there. She quietly opened the door with her key. The apartment was silent. Maximiliano must have already left for work. She slipped off her shoes and headed toward the table. The passport lay exactly where she expected. She picked it up and put it in her bag. She was about to leave when she heard voices from the kitchen. Maximiliano was still home, and he wasn't alone. Esmeralda froze in the hallway. Her husband's voice was muffled but distinct, and alongside it, a woman's voice, a familiar one. Esperanza. Her mother-in-law had come on, apparently. "It's time to act decisively," Esperanza insisted. "How much longer are you going to stall? The money is just lying there dead." "Mother, it's not that simple," Maximiliano answered worriedly. "Esmeralda isn't a fool. She controls everything." "All the more reason," his mother snapped. "The longer we wait, the harder it'll be. You see how she's changed? She used to be softer, more trusting. Now she counts every penny." Esmeralda leaned against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid they would hear it. Each of Esperanza's words echoed in her head. The money is just lying there dead. What money? Her savings. The cafe revenues. She remembered how a month ago Maximiliano had casually asked about the size of her bank accounts. Back then it had seemed natural. After all, a husband should know the family finances. And before that, he had praised her entrepreneurial skills, asked about business details, suggested ideas for expansion. Could all of that have been reconnaissance? "At least is the apartment in your name?" Esperanza asked briskly. "Not yet," Maximiliano answered hesitantly. "Esmeralda says it's too soon. We've only been married 2 years." "That was a mistake," Esperanza snapped. "You should have insisted right after the wedding. Now it's more complicated. And the business? Do you at least have a share in it?" "Formally, no," Maximiliano admitted guiltily. "But I'm her husband. By law, I have rights." "By law," Esperanza scoffed. "And she'll hire lawyers and you'll be left with nothing. Listen to me carefully, son." Esmeralda closed her eyes, recalling other suspicious moments. Maximiliano insisting they go together to a notary for a marriage contract, his interest in the apartment documents under the pretext of family records, his questions about her business partners and their shares. It all fit into a pattern too terrible to accept. "Is the loan secured?" Esperanza demanded. "Yes," Maximiliano said quietly. "I signed the papers yesterday, using Esmeralda's apartment as collateral." Esmeralda felt her blood run cold. A loan against her apartment? Without her knowledge? How was that even possible? Illegal, wrong, dishonest. "Well done," Esperanza said approvingly. "Now we have leverage. She won't want to lose her home. She'll agree to our terms." "And if she doesn't?" Maximiliano asked uncertainly. "She will," Esperanza said firmly. "Women always choose stability, especially someone like your Esmeralda. She's used to comfort, to prosperity. She won't risk losing everything over principles." "Mother, I feel awkward about this," Maximiliano murmured. "Esmeralda is good. She loves me." "Of course she loves you," Esperanza replied condescendingly. "That's why she'll give in. You're not asking for all the money at once. You just want fairness. A husband should have equal rights in the family." Esmeralda carefully moved toward the door. She had to leave unnoticed. Think through what she had heard. The parquet creaked under her foot. "What was that?" Maximiliano asked, alarmed. "Probably the neighbors," Esperanza answered dismissively. "Don't get distracted. Now remember the main rule, act gradually. First the apartment, then a share of the business. After that, we can think about expansion." "Expansion?" Maximiliano repeated, surprised. "Of course," his mother replied mockingly. 4 cafes are fine, but it could be more. I know investors ready to put in money if the terms are right." "Esmeralda doesn't want investors," Maximiliano objected. "She says she wants to grow on her own." "Esmeralda doesn't want a lot of things," Esperanza said with contempt. "That's why she's been stuck with just 4 locations for 2 years. She could have a network of 20 by now. Women don't have real business sense. They need a man by their side to steer them in the right direction." Esmeralda quietly opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Her hands were trembling, her mind racing. Everything she had believed in for the past 2 years was collapsing. Maximiliano, who had seemed like a loving husband, turned out to be a calculating predator after her fortune. And she, a naive fool, hadn't seen the obvious. She went down to the first floor and stepped outside. She needed time to think. The business trip would have to be canceled. Right now, it was more important to deal with what was happening in her own family. Esmeralda took out her phone and dialed the travel agency. "Hello, this is Esmeralda," she said briskly. "The flight for today needs to be canceled. Yes, I understand about the penalties. Force majeure." Then she called Maximiliano. "Hi, darling," she said cheerfully. "Listen, I'm having some problems with my documents at the airport. The trip's been postponed for a week. I'm heading home now." "What a shame," Maximiliano replied with genuine sympathy. "Are you upset?" "A little," Esmeralda admitted sadly. "It's okay. We'll get through it." "Of course we will," her husband reassured her. "I'm at work now, but I'll be home later. Maybe we could go out for dinner. It'll cheer you up." "Good idea," Esmeralda agreed. She got into a taxi and went to her cafe downtown. She needed a place where she could think calmly and time to decide what to do next. The cafe was quiet. The morning rush hadn't started yet. Esmeralda ordered herself a double espresso and sat in the far corner. Barista Bartolome looked at his boss in surprise. "So early?" he asked curiously. "Weren't you supposed to be flying out on a business trip?" "Plans changed," Esmeralda answered shortly. She gazed at her reflection in the cafe window. 2 years ago, in that same reflection, she had seen a happy bride. Back then, she had been planning her honeymoon. It had seemed like the beginning of a long life together, full of mutual support and understanding. Noticing her state, Bartolome carefully approached with a fresh cup of coffee. "Esmeralda, maybe you need to talk," he asked gently. "I can see something's wrong." "Thank you, Bartolome," she replied gratefully. "It's just a hard day." "I understand," the young man nodded with sympathy. "You know, my grandmother used to say, when life falls apart, it means the old one didn't fit. It's clearing space for something better." Esmeralda smiled. The 20-year-old student barista turned out to be wiser than many adults. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," she said warmly. "She was," Bartolome answered sadly, "but her words still help." Esmeralda looked at him more closely. Honest, open, without hidden motives. That's how she had once seen Maximiliano. Was it a mistake, or can people really change so drastically? She opened her tablet and began checking the bank accounts. If Maximiliano had really taken out a loan using her apartment as collateral, there had to be traces. And if he had done it behind her back, it meant he had forged documents. That was already serious. The coffee tasted bitter on her tongue. Esmeralda stared out the window at the passers-by. She thought about how quickly life could collapse. Just that morning, she had been a happy wife and a successful businesswoman, and now she felt like the victim of a scam. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maximiliano. "I already miss you. I love you." Esmeralda reread the message several times. Could all this tenderness have been an act? Or did Maximiliano truly feel something for her, even while planning to use her financially? She remembered how they met 2.5 years ago. A corporate party at mutual friends. Back then, Maximiliano worked as a manager at a construction company. He lived modestly but with dignity. He hadn't tried to impress her with expensive gifts or restaurants. On the contrary, he suggested simple dates, walks in the park, home-cooked dinners, trips to the cinema. Esmeralda had thought she had met a real man, someone who wasn't interested only in her money. Maximiliano had even insisted on paying his own way at restaurants, though his salary was a fraction of her income. Could it all have been a performance? By noon, Esmeralda had reviewed all banking operations for the past 6 months. There were no suspicious transactions, but that meant nothing. The loan could have been arranged recently. The money might not have been deposited yet. She called the bank where she had her mortgage. "Good afternoon," she said politely. "This is Esmeralda. I'd like to clarify some information about my apartment. Has there been any attempt to take out additional loans?" "One moment, I'll check," the bank employee replied. "Yes, yesterday there was a request to issue a loan secured by your property. The documents were filed by your husband. Everything is in order. The loan was approved." "For what amount?" Esmeralda asked tensely. $50,000, the banker answered calmly. "The money will be credited to the account within 3 business days." Esmeralda hung up. $50,000, secured by her apartment, without her knowledge. $50,000, a sum that could have funded 5 more cafes. or a country house, the one she and Maximiliano had dreamed of. Now that money had become a weapon against her. She imagined Esperanza's reaction when she found out the plan had failed. Her mother-in-law wasn't the kind of woman who gave up after one setback. There would be other attempts, other schemes. Now she knew for sure. The morning conversation hadn't been her imagination. Maximiliano and his mother were truly plotting to strip her of everything, and they were doing it coldly and methodically. The war had begun, and Esmeralda had to be ready. The question remained, what to do next? The next morning, Esmeralda woke with a heavy head. The night had been spent in restless thoughts. Each time Maximiliano stirred in his sleep, she tensed. It felt as if he might read her mind. At breakfast, her husband acted as usual. He carefully poured her coffee, asked about her plans for the day. "How's the business trip?" he asked, spreading butter on his toast. "When was it postponed to?" "Next week," Esmeralda replied with feigned indifference, hiding her tension. "Today I'll handle some current office tasks." "Maybe we'll go out tonight?" Maximiliano suggested with a smile. "You were upset yesterday about the trip." "We'll see," she answered evasively. "There's a lot of work piled up." Maximiliano nodded understandingly. He kissed his wife on the cheek before leaving. "See you tonight, my love. Have a good day." Esmeralda watched him go. How well he played the role of a caring husband. If not for what she had overheard the day before, she would never have suspected anything. At the office, Esmeralda locked herself in her office immediately. She turned on her computer, opened the banking program, and tried to calm down. She needed to check all financial transactions over the past year to find traces of Maximiliano's secret plans. The first hour of searching revealed nothing. All transactions looked standard. Employee salaries, payments to suppliers, utility bills, rent. Esmeralda opened the folder with her apartment documents. She carefully studied each paper. In the mortgage agreement, there was a strange note dated a few months ago. She called the bank again. "Good afternoon," Esmeralda said formally. "I spoke with you yesterday about a loan against my apartment. Could you clarify the details?" "Of course," the employee replied politely. "Your husband submitted the application 3 days ago. All documents are in order. There is a notarized power of attorney from last month, giving him permission to manage the property." "What power of attorney?" Esmeralda asked, barely controlling her voice. "A notarized one. From last month. It authorizes your husband to dispose of the property." Esmeralda felt her stomach turn cold. She had signed no such power of attorney. The document had to be forged. "Please send me a copy," she requested. "I'll email it within an hour." Esmeralda hung up. Her hands were trembling slightly. Maximiliano wasn't just planning to use her money. He was forging documents. This was outright fraud. An hour later, an email arrived with an attachment. Esmeralda opened the file. It was a scan of the power of attorney. The signature looked very much like hers, but she knew for certain she had never signed it. Her phone rang. It was her friend Soledad. "Hey, workaholic," Soledad said cheerfully. "How's the business trip? Already on the plane?" "Soledad, I need to talk to you," Esmeralda answered seriously. "Urgently. Can we meet?" "Of course. What happened? You sound strange." "I'll explain in person. Let's meet at the cafe on Central in an hour." "All right, I'll be there." Esmeralda shut down her computer and grabbed her bag. She needed advice from someone close, someone she could trust completely. The cafe on the main street was almost empty. Daytime, a workday, few customers. Soledad was already sitting at a table by the window, smoking an e-cigarette. When she saw Esmeralda, she waved. "Sit down quickly," her friend said. "You look awful. What happened?" Esmeralda sat down across from her and ordered a double espresso from the waiter. "Soledad, do you remember how you always said Maximiliano was too good to be true?" "I remember," Soledad replied warily. "Why?" "You were right. Yesterday, I accidentally overheard him talking with my mother-in-law. They're planning to take over my money." Soledad straightened in her chair and put aside her cigarette. "Tell me everything in detail, from the very beginning." Esmeralda recounted yesterday's events. The forgotten passport, the overheard conversation, the call to the bank, the forged power of attorney. Soledad listened silently, her face growing darker with every word. "What a bastard," she swore when Esmeralda finished. "Excuse my language, but I always felt something was off. He tried too hard to impress you. What should I do? Esmeralda asked helplessly. I don't even know if he loves me, or if it was all a game from the very start. Does that matter? Soledad asked sharply. He forged your signature, took out a loan without your knowledge. That's a crime, Esmeralda. I know, but I need to figure this out. Understand the scale of the problem. Then play his game, Soledad advised. Pretend you don't know anything. Meanwhile, dig deeper. Look for other suspicious activities. What if he suspects something? He won't. You're a good actress. Remember those plays you were in at university? Everyone believed your roles. Esmeralda gave a faint smile. Soledad was right. She needed time to investigate, while Maximiliano still believed she was unaware of his plans. There's another problem, Esmeralda continued. I don't know who else I can trust. Maybe others are involved. From your circle? Soledad asked in surprise. I don't know. Esperanza mentioned some investors, acquaintances. Maybe they're people from my business. Then check everyone, Soledad said firmly. Documents, contracts, account access, everything. Soledad, do you remember our talks 2 years ago? Esmeralda asked thoughtfully. When I had just met Maximiliano. Of course I remember, her friend nodded. You were head over heels in love. You told me how attentive and caring he was. Exactly. And what else did I say? Soledad frowned, trying to recall. That he never asked you for money, she said slowly. That he insisted on paying in restaurants himself. That he didn't pry into your business too much. Exactly, Esmeralda said with a bitter smile. The perfect behavior of a man supposedly uninterested in money. Too perfect, Soledad added grimly. I told you, people aren't that selfless, especially men dating successful businesswomen. And I didn't listen, Esmeralda admitted. I thought you were just cynical. Esmeralda, I worked in auditing for 5 years, Soledad said seriously. I saw dozens of divorces with property disputes. The schemes vary, but the principle is always the same. First gain trust, then gain access to finances. Esmeralda took a sip of her coffee. It tasted as bitter as the whole situation. You know what scares me most, she said quietly. Not that he wants money, but that I don't know. Did he ever love me at all? Or was everything calculation from day one? Does that matter for your next steps? Soledad asked pragmatically. Probably not, Esmeralda sighed. But for my peace of mind, it does. They sat in the cafe for another half hour, discussing a plan of action. Soledad offered to help review the documents. She had experience from her years in an auditing company. Thank you, Esmeralda said gratefully. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what friends are for, Soledad replied. The important thing is, be careful. If they sense you know something, they might accelerate their plans. Esmeralda nodded, said goodbye to her friend, and went back to the office. The rest of the day was spent carefully reviewing documents. Esmeralda opened the safe in her office, took out the folder with the originals of all her important contracts, and began comparing them with the electronic copies on her computer. The first few documents matched completely, but then she noticed something odd. In the electronic version of a contract with a coffee supplier, there was an additional clause allowing for a change of payer. In the original, that clause did not exist. Esmeralda checked the date of the last modification on the file. 2 weeks ago. Who could have accessed her computer? Only she and the system administrator, Anselmo, knew the passwords. She called him. Anselmo, it's Esmeralda, she said briskly. Tell me, has anyone asked for access to my computer recently? No, Esmeralda, he replied in surprise. Why? What's going on? I'm reviewing documents and there are discrepancies, she explained cautiously. Can you check the login logs? Of course, Anselmo agreed. I'll send them in half an hour. Esmeralda hung up. If someone had altered documents remotely, there had to be traces. Modern systems recorded everything. Half an hour later, an email arrived with the report. Esmeralda studied the dates and times carefully. Most matched her work schedule, but one login stood out. Last Saturday at 10 p.m. Esmeralda remembered perfectly. On Saturday evening, she and Maximiliano had been at home, watching a movie. That meant someone else had accessed her office computer. She reviewed all the supplier contracts, employee agreements, property leases, everywhere she looked for suspicious clauses or changes. By evening, she found another oddity. In the lease contract for one of her cafes, a new clause had appeared, allowing the transfer of lease rights to third parties. It was dated last month, but Esmeralda didn't remember signing any addendum. She called the landlord. "Good evening, Christian. This is Esmeralda. I wanted to clarify something about an addendum to the lease." "What addendum?" the man asked, surprised. "From last month, about transferring rights to third parties." "We didn't sign anything," the landlord said firmly. "There were no addenda." "I see. Thank you for the information." Esmeralda hung up. That meant this document was fake too. Someone was preparing the ground to transfer her business, most likely to those investors Esperanza had mentioned. At 7 in the evening, she arrived home. Maximiliano was already there, cooking dinner in the kitchen. He greeted his wife with a smile. "How are you, darling?" he asked, hugging her. "You look better than this morning." "Work distracted me," Esmeralda replied. "And how was your day?" "The usual. Meetings, reports. Boring without you." He spoke so sincerely, looked into her eyes with such tenderness. If it hadn't been for yesterday's conversation, Esmeralda would have believed every word. Over dinner, Maximiliano talked about plans for the weekend. He suggested going out of town, trying a new restaurant, going to the theater. Esmeralda watched him closely during dinner. Every gesture now seemed false. He carefully served her salad, and immediately the words of her mother-in-law echoed in her mind. "Money is just lying there, dead weight." Maximiliano talked about his colleagues, complained about his boss. Just ordinary family talk. But now Esmeralda kept wondering, was he probing for information for his schemes, fishing for something important? "By the way," Maximiliano suddenly said, "how's Bartolome doing at the cafe? You said he was doing a great job." Esmeralda stiffened. "Why are you suddenly asking about the barista?" "He's doing fine," she answered cautiously. "Why?" "Just curious," Maximiliano shrugged. "You rarely praise employees so openly." "Bartolome really is good," Esmeralda confirmed. "Responsible, honest." Maximiliano nodded and went on eating, but Esmeralda noticed he wrote something down in his phone. Why would he need information about Bartolome? Every little thing now seemed suspicious. Every question, a reconnaissance attempt. Living like this was unbearable. But for now, there was no choice. "Maybe we should sort through the documents?" Esmeralda suggested innocently. "You said it would be good to organize the family archive." "Documents?" Maximiliano repeated. "What kind?" "Well, contracts, agreements. My office is a mess. Maybe we could go through them at home?" "Of course I'll help," her husband agreed. "But let's do it this weekend. I'm too tired after work right now." Esmeralda nodded. She noticed how Maximiliano tensed up at the mention of documents. That meant he had something to hide. After dinner, they watched television. Maximiliano hugged his wife, stroked her hair, and talked about plans for a summer vacation. "Maybe we could go to Europe," he suggested. Everything inside her clenched at the falseness of the situation. Maximiliano was making plans with her money, and she pretended to believe his words. "By the way," her husband said casually, "Mom called. She wants to come over this weekend. You don't mind, do you?" Esmeralda felt her muscles tighten. "What for?" she asked cautiously. "She misses us. Hasn't seen us in a while. Maybe the three of us could go somewhere together." "All right," Esmeralda agreed. "Let her come." She understood. Her mother-in-law's visit wasn't accidental. Esperanza wanted to check how things were going, to see whether Esmeralda had started suspecting anything. Before bed, Maximiliano kissed his wife for a long time. He spoke of love, made plans for the future. Esmeralda responded to his affection, but inside she felt cold and empty. Before bed, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at her reflection and not recognizing herself. 2 days ago, she had been a happy wife. Now she was a detective investigating her own husband's crimes. Maximiliano appeared in the bathroom doorway. "You're taking a long time tonight," he said gently. "Tired?" "A little," Esmeralda answered quietly without turning. He hugged her from behind and kissed her neck. In the mirror, she saw his face. Calm, loving. How well he could pretend. "I love you so much," Maximiliano whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Esmeralda closed her eyes. Those words once warmed her soul. Now they cut like a knife. I love you too, she lied. Some games have to be played to the end, even if they tear your heart apart. When her husband fell asleep, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about how quickly trust could collapse, how easy it was to be deceived by someone. 2 years ago, she had been certain she'd found her love, a man she wanted to spend her life with, and now she didn't know if he had ever loved her for even a single day. Tomorrow, she would have to continue the investigation, find all the forged documents, understand how deep the deception went, and decide what to do next. Esmeralda closed her eyes and tried to relax. Another night of pretense lay ahead, and then a new day of fighting for her life. The next morning, Esmeralda woke up with a clear plan of action. She needed to obtain official confirmation of the loan, gather all the evidence of fraud, and only then act. Maximiliano left for work early, saying he had important meetings. Esmeralda saw him off as usual, kissed him goodbye, and wished him luck. In the evening, let's talk about the weekend, Maximiliano said warmly. I want to surprise you. I'll be waiting, Esmeralda smiled. A surprise. She wondered what other trick he was preparing. An hour after her husband left, Esmeralda went to the bank. She needed to see all the documents with her own eyes, to understand the scale of the fraud. The bank smelled of formality and money. Esmeralda passed through the turnstiles, feeling her heartbeat quicken. Now she would learn the truth, full and final. She was greeted by the same employee she had spoken to on the phone, a young man of about 30 in a strict suit, neat with a professional smile, clearly unaware of the drama unfolding before him. Esmeralda, welcome, he greeted warmly. My name is Cristobal. I processed the loan for your husband. I want to see all the documents, Esmeralda said firmly, especially the power of attorney. Cristobal pulled out a thick folder. Esmeralda noticed how many papers there were. Could so many documents really be needed for fraud? You see, the banker began cautiously, flipping through the pages. Your husband prepared everything very thoroughly. All the certificates, all the income verifications, even a reference from his job. Esmeralda felt a chill. So Maximiliano had been planning this scheme for months, collecting documents, thinking through the details. And why would he need a job reference, she asked tensely. To confirm solvency, Cristobal explained patiently. The bank must be sure the loan will be repaid. Esmeralda barely held back a bitter laugh. Maximiliano clearly had no intention of repaying the loan. The plan was something else. May I see all the documents? She asked. Of course, Cristobal agreed readily. But first I need to verify your identity. Passport, please. Esmeralda handed over her ID. Cristobal carefully checked the details and opened the folder of papers. Here is the loan application, he showed her the first page. Signed by your husband, and here is your power of attorney. Esmeralda took the document, studied the signature closely. It looked very similar to her handwriting, but she knew for certain she had never signed this. When was this power of attorney issued? She asked warily. A month ago, Cristobal replied confidently, at a notary's office on Libertad Street. And who was present at the signing? Esmeralda pressed further. According to the documents, only you and the notary, the banker said with a puzzled shrug. Standard procedure. Esmeralda nodded and wrote down the notary office's address. She would need to check that as well. When will the money be deposited? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Cristobal answered. $50,000 into the account specified in the application. And which account is that? Cristobal showed her the account details. Esmeralda didn't recognize the number. It wasn't her account. Can you tell me whose account this is? She pressed. Your husband's, Cristobal said in surprise. Weren't you aware? Esmeralda felt her stomach clench. Maximiliano was securing money against her apartment, but into his personal account, without her knowledge or consent. Thank you for the information, she said evenly. I need copies of all the documents. No problem, the banker agreed. 5 minutes for the copies. While Cristobal copied the papers, Esmeralda thought through the situation. Tomorrow morning, Maximiliano would receive $50,000, money secured by her apartment, based on a forged power of attorney. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a criminal fraud. All set, Cristobal returned with the folder. All the copies are here. Tell me, can the loan be canceled? Esmeralda asked cautiously. Theoretically, yes, the banker mused. but strong grounds are needed. For example, if you prove document forgery. And if I prove it, then the loan will be annulled, Cristobal answered confidently, and a criminal case will be opened. Esmeralda nodded, took the folder of copies, said goodbye, and left. Her next stop was the notary's office, a small office in an old building with high ceilings. Esmeralda climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. Behind the counter sat a woman of about 50, strict, with a neat hairstyle and a piercing gaze, not the kind of person you could easily deceive. "Good afternoon," Esmeralda greeted as calmly as she could. "A month ago, a power of attorney was issued in my name here. I'd like to clarify some details." The notary looked carefully at the visitor. Esmeralda sensed that she was comparing her with someone in her memory. "Strange," the woman said slowly. "You look, different." "In what way?" Esmeralda asked cautiously. "I don't know," the notary replied thoughtfully. "Maybe the hairstyle? Or makeup. A month ago, you seemed younger?" Esmeralda felt her throat go dry. So the woman remembered the imposter, and she noticed the difference. "Your documents, please," the notary requested officially. Esmeralda handed over her passport. The woman checked the data on the computer. "Yes, there was such a power of attorney," the notary confirmed, with doubt in her voice. "But you issued it yourself. Don't you remember?" "Not very well," Esmeralda lied uncertainly. "Can I see the surveillance footage from that day?" "Why?" the notary asked suspiciously. "Has something happened?" "I suspect document forgery," Esmeralda admitted honestly. The notary's expression changed. It became serious, alarmed. "If that's true," she said sternly, "then I too am a victim of fraud. I was deceived professionally." "Let's figure it out together," Esmeralda suggested firmly. "Recordings are kept for a month," the woman agreed reluctantly, "but usually we don't show them without serious reasons." "I have reasons," Esmeralda declared resolutely. "I suspect forgery." The notary frowned and looked at Esmeralda even more intently. "All right," she agreed cautiously. "Let's have a look." They went into a small room with a computer. The notary found the required date and played the recording. The screen showed the reception area. Esmeralda saw the date and time in the corner of the screen. Exactly 1 month ago, 2 p.m. A woman appeared in the frame. Medium height, dark hair, similar build. But it wasn't Esmeralda. When the stranger with the fake passport appeared on the screen, Esmeralda felt a strange relief. Now she had undeniable evidence. Maximiliano would not be able to deny the obvious. "That's not me," she stated confidently. "How can it not be you?" the notary asked in confusion. "But the passport was genuine. I checked it thoroughly." "The passport could have been fake," Esmeralda explained patiently, "or stolen. Can you zoom in on the image?" The notary enlarged the picture. The woman's face became clearer. Definitely not Esmeralda. Similar, but not her. "My God," the notary whispered. "How did I miss the substitution?" The passport looked genuine. "A professional forgery," Esmeralda said grimly. "My husband prepared carefully." "Good heavens," the notary exclaimed in shock. "What should we do?" "If the power of attorney was issued by fraudsters, we need to go to the police," Esmeralda said firmly, "and annul the document." "Yes, of course," the woman nodded anxiously. "I'll cancel it right away and file a report of fraud." Esmeralda received a certificate of cancellation of the power of attorney. Now she had all the proof: the fake document, the surveillance recording, the notary as a witness. She went back to the bank to see Cristobal. "I have proof of forgery," she announced solemnly, handing him the certificate. "I'm canceling the loan immediately," the banker replied seriously, "and I'll forward the case to the security department." "Thank you," Esmeralda sighed with relief. "And what about my husband? He's supposed to come for the money tomorrow." "We'll detain him and call the police," Cristobal explained matter-of-factly. "It's standard procedure in cases of fraud." Esmeralda nodded. So tomorrow Maximiliano would learn that his plan had failed, and that he now faced criminal charges. She returned home by 5 in the evening. Maximiliano hadn't come back from work yet. Good. She needed time to prepare for the conversation. Esmeralda laid out all the collected documents on the kitchen table. Bank copies, the notary certificate, printouts of the altered contracts. Now she had proof. Maximiliano wouldn't be able to deny the obvious. At 6:30, she heard footsteps in the stairwell. Esmeralda quickly gathered the papers and hid them in a desk drawer. It wasn't time to show her cards yet. "Hi, darling," Maximiliano said cheerfully as he walked into the apartment. "How was your day?" "Fine," Esmeralda replied calmly. "How were your negotiations?" "Excellent," her husband smiled. "By the way, I've got a surprise. Tomorrow evening we're going to a restaurant to celebrate good news." "What news?" Esmeralda asked curiously. "You'll find out tomorrow," Maximiliano winked mysteriously. Esmeralda smirked to herself. Tomorrow he would get very different news. Not happy ones at all. Dinner went by peacefully. The evening at home turned into a theater of the absurd. Maximiliano played the role of a happy husband, anticipating joyful changes. Esmeralda acted the part of an unsuspecting wife. "You know," Maximiliano said dreamily, pouring wine, "I've been thinking for a while about expanding your business. I have some ideas." "What kind of ideas?" Esmeralda asked with feigned curiosity. "New formats, modern solutions," he said enthusiastically. "We could open coffee shops with co-working spaces, or add food delivery." Esmeralda listened and marveled at her husband's cynicism. He was making expansion plans with money he intended to steal, talking about our future while planning to rob her. "And where would the funding come from?" she asked innocently. "We'll find investors," Maximiliano answered confidently. "My mom has contacts, serious people." Esmeralda nodded. The same investors her mother-in-law had mentioned, most likely accomplices in the scheme. "Sounds interesting," she agreed calmly, "but all that takes time to prepare." "We have time," Maximiliano smiled mysteriously. "Soon we'll have opportunities we never dreamed of." If only he knew what awaited him at the bank tomorrow. Maximiliano went on, talking about work, made plans for the weekend. He was unusually affectionate and attentive, preparing to receive the money. Esmeralda thought grimly, trying to lull her vigilance. "By the way," Maximiliano said casually over dessert, "Mom's coming tomorrow. She wants to congratulate us." "Congratulate us on what?" Esmeralda asked innocently. "On the good changes in our life," her husband answered vaguely. Esmeralda nodded. So Esperanza was in on the plan too. She'd be coming to celebrate the successful scam. "And what time will she be here?" Esmeralda asked with apparent interest. "By lunchtime," Maximiliano said happily. "She said she'd bake a celebratory cake." "How sweet," Esmeralda said with barely noticeable irony. After dinner, they watched a movie. Maximiliano hugged his wife, kissed her, spoke of love. Each word stabbed Esmeralda's heart. How long had he been planning this deception? From the very first day they met? Or did the decision come later? She stared at the screen and thought about tomorrow. Maximiliano would go to the bank, try to get the money. He'd be detained. The police would arrive. And what would she do then? Support her husband? Or tell the truth about his plans? "What are you thinking about?" Maximiliano asked, noticing her silence. "Work," Esmeralda lied. "There's a lot piling up." "Don't think about work at home," her husband advised gently. "Home should be a place of rest." "You're right," she agreed. If only he knew what really occupied her thoughts. If only he understood that tomorrow his world would collapse. Before bed, Maximiliano kissed Esmeralda for a long time, told her how much he loved her, how happy he was with her, how he wanted their life to get even better. "Tomorrow will be a special day," he whispered, "the start of a new life for us." "Yes," Esmeralda agreed softly, "the start of a new life." Only that new life would be nothing like what he was planning. When Maximiliano fell asleep, Esmeralda lay wide awake. Tomorrow everything would change. Her marriage would end. The deception would end. A new chapter of her life would begin. It was frightening to think about what lay ahead. Divorce, court proceedings, loneliness. But even more terrifying was the thought of continuing to live with a man who had betrayed her trust, who had planned to rob her, who had played the role of a loving husband for 2 years. Better the bitter truth than a sweet lie. Tomorrow she would find out what Maximiliano was truly capable of when his plan failed. Would he show his real face or try to justify himself and apologize? Either way, there was no turning back. The decision had been made. Esmeralda closed her eyes, tried to fall asleep. Tomorrow would be a hard day, but after it, freedom would begin. "Good morning, darling," Esmeralda said cheerfully as she walked into the kitchen the next morning. Maximiliano was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked nervous, but tried to appear calm. "Morning, love," he replied with a strained smile. "You're up early." "Lots to do today," she answered indifferently. "And where are you going? I see you're already dressed." "I have to stop by the bank," Maximiliano said casually. "Some documents. Then to work." "All right," Esmeralda nodded. "See you this evening." She poured herself some coffee and sat down across from her husband. She watched as he nervously tapped his fingers on the table. "Are you nervous?" she asked sympathetically. "A little," Maximiliano admitted. "I'm finalizing important documents for our future." "What documents?" Esmeralda asked with feigned curiosity. "I'll tell you this evening," he replied evasively. "I don't want to jinx it yet." Esmeralda nodded. He was still playing the role of the caring husband, even knowing that within an hour he would be under arrest. Maximiliano finished his coffee, kissed his wife on the cheek. "I love you," he whispered. "Soon everything will change for the better." "See you later," Esmeralda answered softly. She walked him to the door, watched from the window as he got into the car and drove away. The last time as a free man. Esmeralda hadn't fully regained her composure when her phone rang. The bank's number appeared on the screen. "Good day, Esmeralda." Cristobal's familiar voice sounded tense. "Your husband has just spoken with our specialists. We detained him, as agreed." "What happened?" Esmeralda asked quickly, stepping into the hallway. "He came for the money at 9 a.m., the banker explained in detail. "When we informed him that the loan had been canceled, at first he didn't believe it. Then he started shouting that it was a mistake." "And then?" she asked, holding her breath. "We called security," Cristobal replied calmly. "Investigators are working with him now. He's demanding a lawyer and a phone call to his wife." Esmeralda felt her stomach tighten. So it had begun. There was no turning back. "Thank you for the information," she said evenly. "I'll wait for the official summons." "Esmeralda," Cristobal added cautiously, "your husband claimed you were an accomplice, that you planned everything together." "I see," she answered coldly. "Goodbye." She quickly got dressed. She needed to behave as usual. Until he was officially detained, until it moved beyond the bank's security service, she knew nothing. Half an hour later, the phone rang again. An unknown number. "Esmeralda," a stern male voice asked. "Investigator Gonzalez, your husband has been detained on suspicion of fraud. We need your statement." "When?" she asked briskly. "This afternoon, 2 o'clock, at the station on Independencia Street." "I'll be there," Esmeralda replied curtly. She hung up. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Maximiliano was under arrest. Now she needed to give her testimony and officially close this chapter. At 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Esmeralda looked through the peephole. Esperanza was standing there with a large cake in her hands. The mother-in-law had come to celebrate success, not knowing that the plan had failed and her son was sitting in a police station. "Hello, dear," Esperanza exclaimed enthusiastically as she entered the apartment. "Where's our hero? We must celebrate this day." "Maximiliano's at work," Esmeralda lied calmly. "He'll be back this evening." "What a pity," her mother-in-law said with disappointment. "I so wanted to congratulate him personally. Today is such an important day." "Important in what way?" Esmeralda asked innocently. Esperanza narrowed her eyes slyly. "Don't pretend, child," she said sweetly. "Maximiliano told me yesterday that you know everything. About the loan, about our plans." Esmeralda froze. So Maximiliano believed she was in on the scheme, that she agreed to the deception. "Tell me more," she asked cautiously. $50,000, her mother-in-law declared excitedly. "Can you imagine the possibilities? So much can be done." "For example?" Esmeralda asked with interest. "First, to buy myself an apartment," Esperanza began matter-of-factly. "I've already found one, a 2-bedroom next to yours, so I can be closer to the children." "I see," Esmeralda nodded. "And second, to expand your business," her mother-in-law continued. "I have acquaintances with connections. We could open 10 more cafes." "And who are these acquaintances?" Esmeralda asked. "Serious people, Esperanza answered mysteriously. They'll help invest the money properly. Of course, in exchange for a share of the business. Esmeralda smirked inwardly. So the plan was this: get a loan secured by her apartment, buy Esperanza an apartment, and hand part of her business to some partners. Sounds interesting, she said diplomatically. The main thing is that Maximiliano has finally taken the initiative into his own hands. Her mother-in-law nodded approvingly. A man must be the head of the family, make financial decisions. Even without his wife's consent, Esmeralda clarified. A wife must trust her husband, Esperanza lectured. You love Maximiliano, don't you? Then you'll support his decisions. Esmeralda stayed silent. She was astonished at her mother-in-law's cynicism. The woman truly believed she had the right to dispose of someone else's money. And what if I don't agree? She asked quietly. Why wouldn't you agree? Esperanza said, surprised. You're a reasonable girl. You understand that family is more important than money. Family is more important, Esmeralda agreed. But which family exactly? What do you mean? Her mother-in-law asked, confused. Our family, Maximiliano, you, me, we're relatives. Relatives don't deceive each other, Esmeralda replied cautiously. No one is deceiving you, Esperanza protested indignantly. Maximiliano honestly told you about his plans. You agreed. When did I agree? Esmeralda asked tensely. Well, he said you discussed everything, that you understood the need for change. Esmeralda realized Maximiliano had lied to his mother, presented wishful thinking as reality, told her that his wife was aware of the plans, when in fact she knew nothing. Esperanza, she said slowly, do you know that the documents were forged? What documents? Her mother-in-law asked, alarmed. The power of attorney in my name. I didn't sign it. Esperanza's face changed. It grew wary. What are you saying? She asked suspiciously. Maximiliano forged my signature, Esmeralda explained clearly. He hired a woman who pretended to be me at the notary's office. That can't be, her mother-in-law objected. Maximiliano isn't capable of that. He is, Esmeralda said firmly. I have proof. She pulled out a folder of documents, showed bank copies, the notary's certificate, surveillance footage printouts. Esperanza examined the papers with trembling hands. Esmeralda watched her face change. First confusion, then the horror of realization. Finally, despair. I truly didn't know, the mother-in-law repeated like a spell. He said you had agreed, that you wanted to help the family. Help the family? Esmeralda asked bitterly. By handing over $50,000 secured by my own apartment? But your family, Esperanza cried indignantly. In a family, everything is shared. So your debts should be shared too? Esmeralda asked acidly. What debts? Her mother-in-law stammered in confusion. And who was supposed to repay the loan? Esmeralda explained patiently. If the bank didn't get the money, they would seize my apartment. I'd be left on the street. Esperanza fell silent. Apparently, she had finally grasped the scale of the planned crime. Maximiliano said he'd find a way to pay it back, she protested weakly. What way? Esmeralda asked harshly. Sell my business to your investor friends? Her mother-in-law flinched. How do you know that? She asked fearfully. I've heard a lot, Esmeralda said grimly. Your plan was simple. Take out a loan, buy you an apartment, hand my business over to accomplices, and leave me with nothing. Not accomplices, Esperanza objected indignantly. Respectable people. They would have helped to grow the business. For what share? Esmeralda asked with interest. Well, for a controlling stake, her mother-in-law admitted uncertainly. In other words, for everything, Esmeralda summed up coldly. I'd become an employee in my own business. But at least you'd still have a family, Esperanza cried out desperately. With a loving husband who robbed me, Esmeralda reminded her. He wanted what was best, Esperanza pleaded. Best for whom? For himself and his mother? Esperanza burst into tears. Esmeralda looked at her and wondered, could this woman truly not realize she had been planning a crime? Where is Maximiliano now? Her mother-in-law asked hoarsely. At the police station, Esmeralda answered calmly. He was arrested this morning while trying to collect the money. My God, Esperanza whispered in shock. What have we done? We haven't done anything, Esmeralda said sharply. You and your son did. Esperanza sank into a chair. The cake slipped from her hands onto the floor. Cream roses scattered across the kitchen tiles. I didn't know about the forgery, she muttered helplessly. I swear I didn't. Maximiliano said you agreed. Now you know, Esmeralda answered coldly. What should we do? Her mother-in-law asked desperately. How can I help my son? You can't, Esmeralda said dryly. He committed a crime. Now he will answer for it by law. But you could withdraw the complaint, Esperanza pleaded. Say you've changed your mind, that you've forgiven him. I can't, Esmeralda shook her head. The complaint came from the bank, not me. And besides, why forgive someone who wanted to rob me? He loves you, her mother-in-law protested desperately. He just wanted a better life for the family. At my expense, Esmeralda reminded her. Without my consent, that's not love. It's exploitation. Esperanza wept, quietly, hopelessly. Esmeralda looked at her and felt a strange emptiness. Neither pity nor anger, just exhaustion from the whole story. I have to go give my statement, she said. I think you'd better leave. Esmeralda, her mother-in-law sobbed. Didn't these 2 years mean anything? Can you really just turn your back on family so easily? What family? Esmeralda asked wearily. The one that planned to rob me? That saw me as a cash cow? We loved you, Esperanza weakly protested. You loved my money, Esmeralda corrected her. That's not the same thing at all. Her mother-in-law slowly got up, gathered her bag, and walked to the door. I'll pray for Maximiliano, she said quietly on her way out. And for you too. Pray, Esmeralda answered indifferently. But it won't change anything now. The door closed. Esmeralda was left alone. She cleaned the cake off the floor, washed her hands, and prepared to go to the police station. At the station, Esmeralda was met by Investigator Gonzalez, a man of about 45, graying with tired eyes. Please sit down, Esmeralda, he offered politely. Tell me how events unfolded. Esmeralda recounted the entire story in detail, from the forgotten passport to her husband's arrest. The investigator listened attentively, taking notes. Your husband claims that you were aware of his plans, Gonzalez said seriously. Moreover, he names you as the mastermind of the scheme. I have evidence to the contrary, Esmeralda replied calmly. She showed him the documents, a certificate from the notary, surveillance footage. I see, the investigator nodded with understanding. Your husband is trying to shift the blame, a typical reaction. What penalty does he face? Esmeralda asked cautiously. Large-scale fraud, Gonzalez explained matter-of-factly, from 3 to 7 years. And what about me? She asked tensely. Nothing, the investigator reassured her. You're the victim of a crime. Esmeralda nodded. Victim. Strange to recognize herself in that role. Do you have any claims against your husband? Gonzalez clarified. Do you want to file a civil suit for moral damages? I'll think about it, Esmeralda answered thoughtfully. In reality, there was nothing to think about. Maximiliano had destroyed her life. He had to be held accountable. Leaving the station, Esmeralda felt an odd relief. The formalities were over. Her testimony had been given. Now the case was in the hands of justice. She pulled out her phone and called a locksmith. Tomorrow morning, the locks would be changed. Maximiliano would never be able to enter the apartment again. How symbolic. Then she called her lawyer. It was time to begin divorce proceedings. The sooner, the better. Esmeralda got into a taxi and asked to be taken to the cafe. She wanted to talk to Bartolome, an honest guy who didn't play games. The familiar city rolled past outside the window, the same as it had been 2 weeks ago. But now she looked at it with different eyes, the eyes of a free woman. Was it frightening? Yes. Lonely? Also yes, but honest. And honesty was worth more than any comfort. The hardest part was behind her. Now only the formalities remained. Testimony, court, divorce, and then a new life. Without deception, without pretense. Perhaps lonely, but honest. Esmeralda had done everything she had planned. Now she needed to move on. Everything would be fine. She was on her own, but at least without lies. Esmeralda picked up her bag and locked the apartment. Tomorrow the locks would be changed so Maximiliano could never return. For now she still had the illusion that nothing had happened. If he were even released on bail at all, But that was no longer her problem. A week after Maximiliano's arrest, Esmeralda's life had changed beyond recognition. The apartment felt empty. His belongings were gone, along with the wedding photos and gifts from her mother-in-law. The new locks kept out any unwanted visitors. On Saturday morning, Esmeralda sipped coffee in the kitchen. Outside, a fine drizzle fell. The gray sky mirrored her mood. Not sad, but pensive. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Esmeralda," a hesitant male voice asked. "This is Attorney Markov. I represent Maximiliano's interests." "I'm listening," she replied dryly. "My client would like to meet with you," the lawyer said politely, "to discuss the possibility of a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Esmeralda asked, surprised. "Maximiliano is ready to plead guilty," Markov explained, "but he asked that you not file a claim for moral damages in exchange for agreeing to a divorce without property division." Esmeralda smirked. Even sitting in jail, Maximiliano kept bargaining. "Tell your client," she said coldly, "that the property is already mine and I will be filing a claim." "But surely an agreement could be reached," the lawyer pressed. "Maximiliano deeply regrets what happened." "He regrets getting caught," Esmeralda corrected him. "Goodbye." She hung up. Maximiliano was still trying to bargain for leniency, but the time for negotiations was long over. At 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Esmeralda looked through the peephole. On the landing stood a young woman she didn't recognize, with a baby stroller. "Who are you here for?" Esmeralda asked through the door. "For Maximiliano," the stranger answered nervously. "I'm Remedios. We were supposed to meet." Esmeralda opened the door. Before her stood a young woman of about 25, pretty with sad eyes. In the stroller, an infant of about 8 months was sleeping. "Maximiliano isn't here," Esmeralda said cautiously. "And you are?" Remedios faltered. "I know Maximiliano. He promised to help me with money." "Help with money?" Esmeralda repeated. "For my son," the young woman explained quietly. "Maximiliano said he had new opportunities, that he could lend me money for medical treatment." Esmeralda felt a familiar chill in her stomach, another victim of Maximiliano's schemes. "Come in," she offered sympathetically. "Let's talk." Remedios entered the apartment. She left the stroller in the hallway. The baby kept sleeping. "What a beautiful baby," Esmeralda said sincerely. "What's his name?" "Timoteo," Remedios replied proudly. "He's 8 months old, but he has a heart condition. He needs surgery." Esmeralda looked at the sleeping baby and felt a strange pain in her chest. Timoteo was a beautiful child. Dark hair, just like Maximiliano. Perhaps he really was his son. "How far along were you when Maximiliano disappeared?" she asked cautiously. "I had just found out I was pregnant," Remedios answered sadly. "I was going to tell him the next day, but the following morning his phone stopped answering." "And you raised the child alone?" Esmeralda asked with sympathy. "My mother helped," the girl nodded. "But when we found out about the heart condition, she told me to look for his father. So here I am." Esmeralda imagined how Remedios had spent months searching for Maximiliano, how happy she must have been when he finally answered, how much she had believed his promises. "And does he know the boy is sick?" she asked tensely. "Of course," Remedios replied in surprise. "I told him everything, showed him the medical reports. He was very worried." "Worried?" Esmeralda repeated bitterly, and then decided to steal money for the treatment. "He told me he had a chance to make money," the girl said apologetically, "that his wife would help with the investments." Esmeralda understood. Maximiliano had made it sound as if she knew about the child and had agreed to help. Another lie in his long chain of deceit. "Remedios," Esmeralda said seriously, "Maximiliano lied to both you and me. I knew nothing about you or the baby." "But he wanted to help his son," the girl cried desperately. "By committing a crime," Esmeralda reminded her sternly. "That's not help. That's another crime." The baby woke up and began to cry. Remedios took him in her arms, gently rocking him. "Hush, Timoteo," she whispered tenderly. "Mama's here." Esmeralda watched the scene and thought about how many lives Maximiliano had destroyed with his games. Not only hers, Remedios and her child, perhaps others too. "And what does Maximiliano really have to do with him?" Esmeralda asked cautiously, nodding toward the boy. We met 2 years ago, the girl admitted shyly. Not for long, then he disappeared, but recently he suddenly called. Said he had gotten married but hadn't forgotten his son. He admitted paternity? Esmeralda asked hoarsely. No, Remedios shook her head, but he didn't deny it either. He said he would help with the surgery. $165,000 are needed. $165,000, Esmeralda repeated. Now much became clear. Maximiliano had planned to get a $50,000 loan, then sell her business, and with that money help his former lover and her child. Where is Maximiliano? Remedios asked nervously. He promised to meet me today. Maximiliano is in jail, Esmeralda said flatly. For fraud. The girl's face turned pale. In jail? She whispered. He tried to steal money, Esmeralda explained. Forged documents. Took out a loan against someone else's apartment. But he just wanted to help his son, Remedios cried in despair. At the price of theft, Esmeralda replied harshly. That's not help. That's a crime. Remedios began to cry, quietly, hopelessly. Esmeralda looked at her and felt a mix of pity and irritation. And who are you to him? The girl asked through sobs. His wife, Esmeralda answered curtly, or rather, his ex-wife. And you? What, thought? The guest exhaled. Maximiliano said we would never meet, that he would just give me the money for my son's surgery, and that would be it. Maximiliano said a lot of things, Esmeralda said wearily. Most of them weren't true. They sat in the kitchen. Remedios rocked the now-awake baby. Esmeralda brewed tea. A strange picture. Two women deceived by the same man. What do I do now? Remedios asked helplessly. Where can I get the money for the surgery? There are charities, Esmeralda answered practically. Government programs. Maximiliano wasn't your only option. But he promised, the girl repeated stubbornly. Maximiliano promised me many things too. Esmeralda sighed. He promised me love and loyalty. Remedios looked closely at her companion. Did you love him? She asked softly. I thought I did, Esmeralda answered honestly. But it turned out I loved a made-up person. I still love him, Remedios admitted, despite everything. You shouldn't, Esmeralda shook her head. You should love those who deserve it. Remedios finished her tea, gathered the baby's things. Thank you for listening, she said gratefully. Sorry for bothering you. Good luck with the treatment, Esmeralda sincerely wished her. And forget about Maximiliano. He only brings trouble. After Remedios left, Esmeralda sat in the kitchen for a long time. She thought about how many more surprises Maximiliano had in store, how many women he had deceived, how many children he had abandoned. It was a good thing their marriage had been childless. She didn't have to explain to a child why their father was in prison. That evening, Soledad called. How are you, lone she-wolf? Her friend asked cheerfully. I'm fine, Esmeralda answered, getting used to freedom. Want to go out somewhere, Soledad suggested? To the movies or the theater? Take your mind off things. Let's, Esmeralda agreed. I want to get back to normal life. By the way, her friend added, remember Anselmo? My colleague from auditing. He asked for your number. Why? Esmeralda asked, surprised. He wants to invite you to dinner, Soledad explained. He's been in love with you for a long time. Too soon, Esmeralda shook her head. I need to figure myself out first. Right, her friend agreed. Don't rush, but don't go off to a convent either. After her talk with Soledad, Esmeralda felt a surge of energy. Life goes on. There was work, friends, plans. Maximiliano was just an unfortunate episode. Painful, but not fatal. On Monday morning, she went to the office. Her employees greeted her with understanding. No one asked unnecessary questions. Everyone knew what had happened, but tactfully kept quiet. Esmeralda, Bartolome from the cafe approached, I just wanted to say, you're amazing. Not every woman finds that kind of strength. Thank you, Bartolome, she answered warmly. Your support means a lot. And I wanted to suggest something, the young man continued shyly. What if we opened a cafe for young mothers, with a children's area, healthy food, a social project? Esmeralda thought about it. An interesting idea. Helping people instead of enriching swindlers. Let's discuss it in more detail, she said with interest. I like the idea. Great, Bartolome said excitedly. I already made a rough business plan. Bring it tomorrow, Esmeralda decided. We'll look at the numbers. The next day, Bartolome brought a detailed business plan, a cafe for young mothers with a children's area, healthy meals, and developmental activities. Look, he said enthusiastically, in the mornings, breakfast for moms on maternity leave, at midday, kids' parties, in the evenings, family dinners. And the staff? Esmeralda asked practically. Caregivers, entertainers, cooks with experience in children's diets, Bartolome listed, all with medical records and clearances. Investment, she asked businesslike. $25,000 for equipment and renovations, the young man answered. It will pay for itself within a year. Esmeralda studied the numbers. The project was realistic and socially important, exactly what she needed after all she had been through. You know what, Bartolome, she said decisively. Let's try it. But you won't just be the manager. You'll be a co-owner. 30% is yours. Seriously? The young man couldn't believe it. Seriously, Esmeralda smiled. Honest people should get their fair share. Thank you, Esmeralda, Bartolome exclaimed joyfully. I won't let you down. I know, she answered confidently. That's why I'm offering. Finally, the money would go to a good cause, to helping people, not enriching swindlers. Work had consumed her entirely. New projects, plans, meetings. No time to dwell on the past. Maximiliano felt like a bad dream that had finally ended. A month later, Esmeralda received a summons to court. The hearing on the fraud case was scheduled for Thursday. The courtroom was stuffy. Esmeralda sat on the bench for victims and felt eyes on her. Journalists, relatives of other defendants, simply the curious. Maximiliano was brought in handcuffed. Esmeralda involuntarily shuddered. The man she had shared her bed with for 2 years now looked like an ordinary criminal. It was the first time she had seen him since his arrest. He had lost weight, grown gaunt, looked older than his age. The prison uniform did not suit his once attractive appearance. Defendant Maximiliano, the judge said sternly, you are charged with large-scale fraud. How do you feel? Fine, Maximiliano rasped. Do you understand the charges? The judge clarified. Yes, I understand. The defendant nodded guiltily. The judge read out the indictment. Forgery of documents, fraud, attempted theft of $50,000. Every word stabbed at Esmeralda's heart. When it came to the victim's testimony, Maximiliano looked at her imploringly, as if asking for mercy, but the time for mercy had passed. Their eyes met. Maximiliano tried to smile. Esmeralda turned away. Defendant, the judge said firmly, do you plead guilty to large-scale fraud? I do, Maximiliano answered quietly. Does the victim have any claims against the defendant? The judge asked Esmeralda. Esmeralda remained silent. Esmeralda, the judge addressed her again. Tell us about the harm done to you. There was no material damage, she said clearly. The loan was canceled in time, but the moral damage is enormous. For 2 years, I lived with a man who was planning to rob me. Do you demand compensation? The judge clarified. Yes, she said firmly. I request compensation for moral damages in the amount of $17,000 for a ruined life. Maximiliano flinched. He must have been hoping for leniency. Do you want to say anything to the victim? The judge asked. Maximiliano stood up, looked at Esmeralda. Forgive me, he rasped. I truly loved you. A strange way of showing love, Esmeralda replied coldly. When the judge announced the sentence, Esmeralda felt not triumph, but emptiness. Justice had prevailed, but it brought no joy. The court sentenced Maximiliano to 5 years in prison, plus repayment of moral damages. Justice was just a cold word. Leaving the courthouse, Esmeralda felt relief. Now it was truly over. She could build a new life without looking back. She got into a taxi and asked to be taken to the park. She wanted to breathe fresh air, think about the future. The park was quiet, few passers-by, the rustling of leaves, birdsong. Esmeralda sat on a bench, closed her eyes. What did she feel? Anger, resentment, relief, all together and nothing specific. Just exhaustion from a long struggle. Her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. Esmeralda, this is Anselmo, Soledad's colleague. Maybe we could meet for coffee. Esmeralda smiled. Life was offering new opportunities, but there was no need to rush. First, she had to learn to be happy alone. She typed a reply. Thanks for the offer, but I'm not ready for dating yet. Maybe later. She sent the message. Got up from the bench. Time to go home. Tomorrow would be a new day, new plans, a new life. As she walked through the park, Esmeralda thought about how much she had changed in these weeks. Stronger, wiser, more cautious. She would no longer believe in pretty words, no longer be so trusting, but she would not become bitter either. She would simply learn to distinguish between love and calculation, between sincerity and play acting, between real people and pretenders. And real people would surely come into her life when she was ready. For now, it felt good to be free, independent, honest with herself. Esmeralda left the park, hailed a taxi, and in half an hour she was home, in her apartment, in her new life. At home, Esmeralda took out a notebook, wrote a list of plans for the coming year, open a family cafe with Bartolome, study law so as never to become a victim again, take up sports, regain physical fitness, travel, see the world with her own eyes, learn to trust people again. The last point was the hardest. How to tell sincerity from manipulation? Love from calculation? Probably only time would show. Esmeralda walked to the mirror, looked at her reflection. A different woman looked back, more serious, cautious, but not broken. Hello, new Esmeralda, she said to her reflection. From now on, we will live differently. Outside, the sun was setting. The day was ending. The difficult chapter of her life was ending. Tomorrow, a new sun would rise. A new day would begin. A new chapter. And it would be much more honest than the previous one. A life without lies and betrayal. A life worth starting. What do you think? Was Esmeralda right to insist her husband be imprisoned? After all, they could have come to an agreement. Or was she right that treachery must be paid for in full? We look forward to your thoughts in the comments.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.